This is Blue Left, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the underrepresented Democratic voices in Tennessee, working tirelessly to bring progressive change to the volunteer state. Here's your host, Peggy Kingsbury.
That's right. From grassroots organizers to community leaders, from urban centers to rural towns, we'll highlight the diverse perspectives and powerful voices that often go unheard. Join us as we lift up the blue wave and shine a light on the path toward a more inclusive and equitable Tennessee. Again, I'm your host, Peggy Kingsbury, and this is Blue Lift, where every voice matters. Let's get started. All right, friends, I'm so glad you're back today to listen to Blue Lift. I want to give you a little bit of a warning before this particular episode. We're going to be discussing gun violence and possibly suicide. If those two things are triggering for you or cause you a lot of angst, then just find something else to listen to and check in for the next episode. All right, so today I'm really pumped to have with us Brink Fidler. Now, that's quite the name.
Yes, ma'am.
Is Brink a family name?
It is
short? Okay.
Yeah, it's my middle name, but yes, it's a family name.
Okay, so the name is Brink. It's not short for anything.
No, ma'am.
Okay, well, it's pretty cool. I mean, I love it when somebody has an interesting name and one that's easy to remember. I like that. I'm sure as a kid you might have caught a little bit of teasing
but
about that.
now it's there's only one. I always say,
it's perfect.
So
yes, it's absolutely perfect. So Brink has spent a couple of decades in law enforcement, and he served for the Metro Nashville Police Department as well as the 20th Judicial District Drug Task Force. And in addition to all those normal law enforcement duties, he has served as an adjunct firearms and tactics instructor. He has planned and conducted hundreds of high-risk tactical and covert operations, and you've been an officer, a narcotics investigator, a patrol sergeant, all the things, and the director of the Drug Task Force in Nashville. And you have directed some real complex investigations. And, of course, I find all this very interesting because we just met, but I also have a law enforcement background.
Oh, right.
I was an officer in Athens, Georgia, out of college. And then I got a master's degree in criminal justice, and I'm instructed at the college level from time to time.
Great.
Various criminal justice programs, and police procedures is my favorite one to instruct. I really like that one. So we come to this kind of with some similar background. Nowadays, Brink is the owner of Defend Systems. Tell us a little bit about Defend Systems and how you came to start that company.
Sure. Defense Systems is, I guess, best described as a life safety and security consulting firm. We specialize in active violence mitigation training for schools, corporations, healthcare, law firms, community centers, you name the organization type. We've probably trained it because this problem is sadly everywhere. We also do some law enforcement training, and then we do security consulting around new construction or existing if we have clients that have higher security vulnerabilities than others based on whatever they do for a living or their celebrity status or whatever that is. We do a lot of consulting around that. Starting it, coming out of law enforcement, I guess my background is kind of what drove me to start it, is having a unique skill set in defeating security, because I was in narcotics work my whole career. I mean, it was my job to defeat security,
right?
Whether it be search warrants or takedowns, or because of the level of cases that our unit worked at the Drug Task Force, we would oftentimes have court orders to sneak in, put in devices, and leave without anybody knowing we'd been in there.
Wow.
So that's a unique perspective, I guess, on physical security. But then also, I tell people when we do training, if you think about the most important things that, goal-wise, that active shooters have when they go do one of these events, their goals are very similar goals that tactical operators and narcotics operators have when we get in the building, right? We're both trying to cover as much ground as quickly as we can with a very offensive weapon, and we're trying to dominate the space that we're in. Same thing active shooters are doing. So when I did that for so long, I learned very quickly what slowed me down or what got in my way and caused problems for me when I was in that building. And so that's kind of the curriculum we've developed, is based on that experience and then also our study of these events.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's really interesting. So from your work as a law enforcement officer going in, you could find places where there was a weakness in the building that you were trying to do what you needed to do, and then you liken that to the shooters. That's pretty cool. I like that. That's a good way to look at it. So I guess I'm going to ask you a really big, broad question then.
Sure.
What is the number one thing you see that most businesses and schools are deficient in as far as these type of shooter events?
Training, hands down.
Okay.
The training is insufficient, non-existent, and that's where the data continues to point us. It's physical security is great. Don't get me wrong. Keeping bad guys out of our businesses and our schools, 100%. But just from a school attack perspective, over 80% of school attacks are conducted by a current or former staff or student, and 90% of that 80 are students.
So they know their way around.
They know how to get in the building, right? You can have all the physical security in the world. That kid's going to know how to get in that building. So back to, do the people in the building know what to do? Yes or no? Like, that is absolutely step one. And that's not, unfortunately, where the focus has been. But when we conduct our training, or I speak or do presentations, I break down a few events and a few timelines to drive that point home that, hey, this thing is so fast. Like, the people in the event are the difference makers. It's not in all that other stuff that we focus on.
Wow. Well, and I talked to somebody the other day, and I was talking about doing this episode, and you may have done the security work at her company. I don't know, but she said that someone came in and did something similar to what you do, and she felt so much better after it was over, because then now she feels like, okay, I know what I need to do if something like this were to happen. So I know you've talked a lot about the Covenant School situation because you trained the employees at Covenant School. And so I know that's a topic you've probably, it's sort of ad nauseum, you're probably just tired of talking about it. But there's some really important lessons. And I don't want to spend the whole time talking about it, but I do want to ask you about this. I know that you did some training there at the school, and I know that some elements of your training saved lives. Talk to me about that.
You've obviously been talking to Jim McCarthy.
I may have listened to another podcast.
Yeah. So I appreciate you saying that. I have a hard time with, crediting what we did there with being the difference maker.
Well, you may have a hard time doing it, but the way I heard it, it's likely true.
I just want to give credit where credit's due, which is to the teachers.
Because they did what you trained them to do.
Yeah, I mean, they were able to perform under stress, which is very difficult.
It is.
And I've seen,
it is.
And you probably have if you were in law enforcement, I've seen cops freeze under less stress than those teachers were put under that day.
I actually one time had to kick an officer to get him into reality and to engage.
Yeah.
He just froze, and I just had to kind of put my foot up and kick him, and and I was stunned by that.
Well, fight, flight, or freeze is real.
Right,
I mean,
right.
we talk about it in training, but so the fact that they were able to perform under that kind of stress is a testament to them and who they are as people, and do the things that were necessary to do to protect lives that day. I mean, the cops did a great job. I mean, a lot of people have seen the body cam footage, and that is about as textbook as it gets as far
absolutely.
as active violence response.
Once they got in and knew where to go.
But to your point, once they got in, I mean, when they stick the key in the door, it's 12 minutes into the attack.
Right,
so,
right.
But
so it's those 12 minutes that are important.
Right, and that's actually a pretty long time for an active shooter attack. I mean, Parkland, Florida was a little over 7 minutes. The Vegas shooting at Mandalay Bay was a little over 10 minutes. So, I mean...
12 minutes is a long time for children and teachers and employees to be in fear, and that's just a long time. So, So specifically, I know that there are some various things that you train schools for. I was really interested to hear that you actually go in and make sure everyone knows what a gunshot sounds like, because a lot of people don't.
Right.
Tell me how you make sure the employees know what gunfire sounds like.
Yeah, so I think that's one thing that makes us different. It's the very last thing we do, though. Like I certainly wouldn't start with that. A lot of people that are in this industry aren't focused enough on who the student is that they're training, right?
Right.
You have to understand we're talking to civilians and everyday people, and
Yes.
like we can't come in and traumatize them and do the rah 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 kill bad guy stuff. Like it just doesn't work with most of the population. So the very last thing we do is a live fire exercise in your building. But I guess what I said makes us different is we discharge live ammunition. We don't shoot blanks. Blanks do not sound the same. It's basic science, right? If there's no projectile coming out, it's a totally different noise.
Makes sense.
But we have bullet traps is how we accomplish that.
Of course. Yeah.
And we do it with a rifle and a pistol both because those sound extremely different.
They do.
But it's really incredible how loud it's not. And that's what gets a lot of people. A lot of people say, oh, it sounded like somebody hammering or somebody, a table falling over. And,
Wow.
It's literally a rifle and a pistol going off in their building. So, that's why we do that exercise, so that their primitive brain has at least registered that before they actually hear the real thing.
That makes sense. And I know at Covenant specifically, one of the major parts of the training is once an instructor, a teacher has recognized that there's gunfire in the building, then what does he or she do vis-a-vis their own classroom where they are there teaching the children? Talk to me just a little bit about that without giving away too many secrets.
I was about to say that's
yeah, can't tell everything.
It's going to be a 30,000-foot answer. Ours is an options-based approach based on the location of the threat. So we our company tagline / mission statement, whatever you want to call it, is we empower you to save lives, including your own. So what we do is try and give you tools, whoever you are, to make decisions for yourself in that moment and those kids. Instead of saying, oh, if I hear this, I have to do this. No, not necessarily. You have choices that you need to make based on the information we gave you during training. So based on the location of the threat in the building to various classrooms, the teachers either got their kids out and went the directions that we had talked to them about in training.
If they had an egress to get out of the building.
Right. Or if they didn't, then they locked down and did all the things they were supposed to do in their classroom by locking doors, taking vision away from bad guys, all those sorts of things. So they did it. I mean, based on exactly what we talked about in training is making those decisions based on the location of the threat to you at the time.
Okay.
So,
and again, listeners, if this sort of thing if you're sensitive to this sort of talk, you might want to move on because I'm going to get a little basic right now. So I know from reading and also from listening to you talk on another podcast that something happened in the school that I wonder if you know how many times this happens where the shooter wants the instructors, the teachers had done the things they were supposed to do, which is, shut the door, pull the shade, take the view away from the shooter. The shooter then just unloaded rounds into the door of the classroom. Is that a common thing that happens?
Very. Yeah.
And it's interesting because even with my background, I never thought about that. But then when I heard that, I thought, well, of course that's what you would do. You would do everything you could to try to either shoot your way into a classroom or just think, I'll just shoot through the door and I'll hit some people. And so your goal then is to make sure that you, when you're training, you've anticipated when that might happen, where those bullets might go, and how to get people away from those.
That's right. And you have to think about, I guess, the shooter's goal in that moment. The shooter's goal doesn't change because the door is locked and the window's covered. Their goal is still to shoot people, right? So
good point. Yeah,
they're going to try and accomplish that whatever way they can. And that a lot of people in the past and have told me that, oh, well, we were trained, do that, and then if you can get out the windows of your classroom, get out the windows and run as fast as you can. And the problem, of course, with that is that puts you in the line of fire of that door potentially.
That's right, because they're usually right across from the window. The door and the windows are right across from each other.
Right. So that can be a little frustrating, and then it's kind of older school thinking. And I guess that, one thing that differentiates us, not from everybody, because I don't know every company by any means, but the amount of research that we do on these events, we take a lot of pride in that. For example, we just went down to Parkland, Florida a few months ago, just a couple weeks before they demolished Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and we met with their lead homicide investigator for an entire day to unpack that event and learn more detail so that we could be better at our jobs.
Wow, that's impressive.
And it's important. What we do has always been important, but it's never been more important in a post-covenant world, where it had to be deployed. We say all the time as a group, we're tired of people dying unnecessarily, but we're really tired of kids dying unnecessarily.
I mean, who isn't, right?
Amen.
Yeah. Well, so let's switch gears just a little bit. I want to say I'm a gun owner, and I know how to use guns, but I'm also a gun owner who doesn't carry one around with me all the time. My theory has always been, if I'm going places where I think I need a gun, maybe I don't need to be going those places, even though I know how to use a weapon and I feel confident that if I had to, I could. I've got one in the places where I might be, that would be home and work, where I might need one, and I do know how to use it. And I don't think I would freeze, I'd hope not. But I realize I have experience and training and all of that most people don't have, just like yourself. And you have quite a bit more than I do for sure. But the general public is a little bit confused about gun violence, and that's because the media has decided to make sure that we're all confused about gun violence. And then they've also made sure that they polarize us, where we have to go right or left on our thinkings about gun violence. It was interesting. I've learned that less than 1% of gun deaths come from mass shootings.
Yeah.
Now, when it's the children down the street, it doesn't matter that it's less than 1%. It seems like the whole world, when that happens. And so I understand that. And then about less than 2% of gun deaths are from accidental shootings, or someone dropping a gun and, that sort of thing. Suicide, that is more than half of gun deaths.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what your thoughts are on the gun culture that we live in, and what you might be thinking of in terms of how we can bring that number down without talking about mental health, because obviously that's a real way to bring suicide deaths down. But how, if someone is suicidal, are there any gun laws you would support that would lessen the opportunity for a suicidal person to have easy access to a firearm?
I think the broader conversation here that has everything to do with suicidal people, school shooters, it all encompasses back to what you said, which is mental health. Like we all as a society really want to figure out, how do we keep people with mental health issues away from firearms? We all agree that those two things should not come together.
Of course.
It's just a slippery slope in how you do it, because of the Second Amendment. If we're talking about trying to go after the tool itself, that gets really slippery because of the checks and balances that are in the Second Amendment. So, and I do want to back up for a second too. Like when you mentioned mass shootings, well, definitions matter, right? Like when you and I think of a mass shooting, we think of somebody going into a mall and shooting a bunch of people. A lot of the mass shootings that are reported are, 14 gang members shoot it out, and 11 of them get hit.
And I think the number that some places uses is 3 or more.
That's right. Considered a mass shooting.
Yes.
But if it's criminals shooting criminals,
right,
it gets misconstrued a little bit about, back to your point about what part of town are you going to, where those things are likely to occur. So I think to your point earlier, I think a lot of that gets skewed. But I'm of the opinion that we used to remove the person, right? Like once they had mental health issues, they were a danger to themselves or others. We then took action to take that person away from society. I think that's I think that needs to be looked at again. We didn't do it correctly back in the 70s, which is why that Supreme Court ruling ruled the way it was. But
I agree with that.
I think it's easier, and it's not easy. Hear me when I say that, but I think we can put checks and balances in place to do more on the mental health side of things. And it's really frustrating when you hear, like the Parkland, Florida shooting, like they had meetings about that kid and said, if anybody's going to shoot up the school, it's him. Well, and then he does it. So like, we obviously don't have enough things in place to deal with that. And, I think that's the broadest picture here is we have a mental health crisis in this country. End of story. I mean.
And so thinking about that, I just want to ask you this. I think we do have a mental health crisis for sure. And I'm not sure why that seems somewhat specific to the United States. But just a question, do you think there is many per capita people suffering from mental health crisis in Europe as there are in the U.S.?
I don't know. I would lean towards not if I had to guess, and I think a lot of it has to do with culture, especially in Europe. European culture is very laid back. I mean, it's very, it's just a very different culture. So, and again, I'm no expert, but I would venture to say probably not if I had to guess. But I haven't done enough research to speak super intelligently on that. I just know it. I've been over there, and it's a very different culture in a lot of good ways. It's not all the ratcheted up anxiety that we tend to have in the U.S. because we're an instant gratification society, right? I mean, especially with all the technology out there, we're instant gratification. I've never seen so much volatility in society as we have right now.
It's frightening, and so I think about these really big topics a lot of time, and I think, well, are there really more mentally ill people in the U.S. per capita than there are in Europe? And why does Europe have so many fewer deaths by gun than we do? And I know some of that's because they don't have the Second Amendment. And so I find that interesting when people say that and we talk about any sort of gun regulation, they want to talk about the Second Amendment. And I get it, and I also understand other amendments, and I know that we have the right to free speech, but we have lots of bumpers put on that. We can't just say anything, anytime to anybody, anywhere, because Supreme Court says we can't. So I'm not opposed to some gun regulation, and I think most Americans are not opposed to some. And then it just becomes talking about what, Of course, there are extremes on either end. There's some people that think, no, the Second Amendment says I can have one anytime. Anybody can have one. We all ought to have one, Right. Then there's people on the other side who say, we just need to get rid of all of them, and you just can't own a gun unless you're law enforcement or military, Right. I don't agree with either of those. I know, for example, like in the UK, for example, and that's a big hunting society there. They'll hunt anything. And they love to hunt and be outside and fire their long guns. But they have come very close to almost really just banning handguns after a couple of bad events. And they just decided, well, why does anybody really need a handgun if you're not law enforcement? And even some of their law enforcement don't carry handguns, as you know.
Right.
So when we think about all this and we think about where Tennessee stands in this spectrum of too many gun laws by some people's estimation, or too few by some people's estimation, where do you think Tennessee is on that spectrum?
I think Tennessee is a very Second Amendment supporting, and what I mean by, like, in the simplest form of the Second Amendment, right? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The guys that wrote that were writing that to give the people power against a tyrannical government. So back to only law enforcement and military. Well, then now the people have no, like, if we turn tyrannical, which historically it doesn't always happen, but it happens a lot. So, I think Tennessee is a very supportive state of just the Second Amendment, not completely in its maybe purest form, as like the Tennessee Firearms Association guys may say, hey, we didn't go far enough with constitutional carry, all those things. But that's everybody's entitled to their own opinion. My ability regardless of my background, but my ability to defend myself and my family. I'm a firm believer in that. And sadly, and unfortunately, at this point in society, there's more guns in circulation than there are people
I know.
in this country. So we're too late. Like if you ban guns, which of course some people are for, well, you think the bad guys are going to show up and turn them in? Like, if you prior law enforcement, bad guys don't. Like bad guys don't care about your sign on your building, right? Like no firearms allowed. Oh, well, you think the shooter's going to turn around and go back?
Yeah, no. No. I recognize completely that's not going to work.
So, but I think there's a lot of common sense people, even in our General Assembly, and some people listening will obviously disagree with that, but I know several of them, and their heart is in the right place on doing something to protect society better.
So what is that something?
Well, I can't get into a ton yet, but I've had a lot of good conversation. Now, this is more around school safety and security than it is anything else. But I think the conversation that came up last year in the General Assembly about the mental health side of things with related to firearms. But again, that's a slippery slope too, right? Because I don't need some... I don't know, like let's say I'm 25-year-old single guy. I don't need some crazy ex-girlfriend being able to go to the court and say, oh, he's a lunatic, and then they storm my house and take me off to jail. And I mean, there's got to be guardrails. But
right, sure. I think anybody with a brain would agree with that.
100%. Just like we have guardrails for the Fourth Amendment, right? Like
correct.
Like we have to have probable cause to go to a judge to get a search warrant before we can just come kick your door in.
Right. And occasionally it doesn't exactly happen that way, but there are guardrails there, and those times when it doesn't are anomalies for sure.
But and that's on all spectrum of the law, right? I mean, just like there's dirty cops, like there's like it's. And I'll tell you this, just on that side note, our unit, we ran into a lot of that because we did wiretaps for a living, so we listened to phone calls, and we would drop everything to go after one of our own if they were dirty, just because it tarnishes the badge. And you got to think about it, in law enforcement, the only thing you have is your word.
That's right.
That's literally your entire career.
But those who are not good seem to, suck the wind out of everything when something happens, don't they? And you're probably like me. Nothing makes me madder.
Definitely. And it's not in every industry though. That's the funny thing is like if a cop does something bad, then everybody's like, screw the cops. If you hear about a doctor doing something bad, then not everybody's like, screw the doctors. It's just...
That's a good point.
It's unfortunate reality.
It is unfortunate. So, I just kind of want to go back to other countries like Canada, for example. I was pretty curious as to, they're our neighbor to the north. They're a civilized society like we are. They're a wealthy country comparatively like we are. And the interesting thing is that the U.S. rate of gun deaths is higher than most other nations, higher than all other nations similar to us in income. We're lower than El Salvador, Venezuela, probably Afghanistan. That kind of thing.
Sure,
of course we are, right? And so I looked specifically at Canada, and I was looking at their gun laws, and I learned that. They do have background checks, which I don't know the stats on that. Don't most states now require some sort of background check?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you have to have a couple of references if you want to go buy a gun in Canada, which is kind of interesting. But they have a really long waiting period, 28 days.
Okay.
Now, that's one of the things that I think might be helpful. I'm not in favor of a 28-day waiting period because surely to goodness we can process paperwork and whatnot by 28 days. But I often ask myself, why would anybody need to go to a gun shop right now this minute and buy a gun? I mean, if you're going to go hunting, well, you've had to apply for a hunting license.
Sure.
So you've made some plans about that. What other reason would somebody need to do that, possibly other than they're homicidal or suicidal?
If there's threats against them or their family, which a lot of law enforcement experience. So law enforcement already have guns.
Well, they already have a gun, yeah.
But if I get mad at you as my neighbor and threaten you, and you really feel threatened, I mean, I think you would probably want to be able to protect yourself that day if you really felt like there was a threat. So,
and I would think if that were me, I would also have already called the police, reported that threat, and then that would give me a way to go buy a gun more quickly. So are you opposed to any kind of waiting period?
For I don't know how we define circumstantially when it's okay and when it's not. Like the scenario I just gave, I 1,000% want to walk in and buy a firearm or somebody threatens my wife or my child.
Or wouldn't you file a police report about that?
Eventually, but
that wouldn't be the first thing you do.
My priority would be protecting their life, hands down. And I don't think filing a report does that. Does it document it? Does it get law enforcement involved? Yes, all those things. Does it stop that threat? Absolutely not. Back to what we were talking about, the shooter at Parkland, Florida. They knew, they'd talked to him, they'd interviewed him, they'd arrested him, they'd done all these things. Did it stop him filing all those reports? No.
I just find it kind of weird though, because I'm very pragmatic. So
Sure.
I'm thinking here, okay, so my neighbor decides that, I've put something in my yard she doesn't like, and she says, I'm gonna kill you and your family. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call the cops immediately. They're going to come to the house. I'm going to file the report. And then if I don't have a way to protect myself and feel like I need a firearm, then as soon as they leave, I'm going to get in my car and put my family in my car with me, and we're going to leave and go to the gun shop. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say I filed a report, and here's the report number, because, the cops give it to you when you write the report out.
Sure.
It would be really odd for me to think the first thing I'm going to do is say, everybody get in the car, we're going to the gun shop. That would be kind of strange.
For you, right? I mean, but the people that have been in the military, or just people that are just wired that way as protectors, the whole sheepdog and wolves thing.
Well, they probably have guns already.
Maybe.
I guess I'm just thinking of a way that we could have some sort of cool off period for someone who's homicidal or suicidal, and I do think about the suicides, and why it just seems reasonable that we might have 3 days, 48 hours, 72 hours.
Yeah. I would be interested to see statistically, and it's probably out there somewhere, how many people that were suicidal became suicidal, went to a gun store, bought a gun, went home, and committed suicide.
Yeah,
or did they already have access to those guns?
But with homicides, I mean, you do, I'm guilty of listening to a whole lot of Dateline episodes when I'm in the car. And frequently you will see that some domestic gets going. You talked about the crazy ex-girlfriend. We say the crazy ex-boyfriend,
sure, of course,
by the way.
Right.
And then, they do go out and get them a gun. Mm-hmm. And, it's those domestics. And, as a former police officer, those domestics, man, that is the height of somebody's emotions. And people do crazy, crazy things.
Definitely.
In the name of love and hate.
Most dangerous call you answer as a police officer is a domestic.
It's very, very scary.
Nobody else can make you that mad, right?
No.
As a human, like our own families,
There's a couple of politicians these days that make me that mad, but okay, I'm not married to them, so that's
volatility, though, right? The most volatile call we get is domestic.
Right. It's unpredictable.
Yeah, but that same person can go and buy a gun from their neighbor, and there's no background check required on a person to person transfer. So if like me, Brink Fidler, sold you a gun, there's no background check required.
Right, which is pretty sad. How about, and this is the one that you and I may come to more agreement than you would think, but how about safe storage?
100% in favor of that. Okay,
so tell me how you would envision that would work.
I think we have to hold people accountable that don't do it. I mean, like that. So could you charge somebody with reckless endangerment or child neglect or all those things if they leave a loaded firearm and access to that child? 100%. If it's statutorily, it fits very well in Tennessee. And if people do that and are negligent, then they need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law if it affects somebody else because of your negligence. I mean, just like we hold people accountable if they get in their car drunk driving or driving reckless and go kill somebody, we hold them accountable. Like we can't. So I'm a huge advocate of that. I don't keep guns just strewn around for anybody to come pick up and do whatever they want to with. I mean, I think, and I think the same goes for suicide. I don't want to get too into detail about this because it's pretty close to home, but I have a friend whose child committed suicide, and his gun was locked up, and we still have no idea how the child was able to get to the gun.
Oh, wow.
Because it was behind a keypad lock.
Right.
And so do I think he needs to be held accountable? No, because he did have it secured. We still to this day don't know how.
And sometimes things just happen. Yeah.
But I think the spirit of what you're talking about, that we 100% agree on, is if something we can do to slow down the suicide crisis that we have in this country. And I talk about mental health in our training. It's a big part of what we talk about.
It is a bit. I mean, and obviously there's not any one thing that's going to help that. It's got to be several things working in concert to change that. And when we talk about safe storage, one of the things I've thought about is that I wonder how many guns are in circulation in the United States that are completely unregistered. And I realize that could have easily happened 20 years ago, but I don't think it could have happened 10 years ago, where a gun is manufactured and it's sent for sale. Generally, that sale happens at a gun shop, right?
Yes.
So for
or
it to
sporting goods store, whatever.
or sporting goods
but
store,
yes, an FFL.
for it to get from the store to someone's hands, it is registered to that person, to the initial buyer of that firearm. Is that right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when we talk about safe storage, you think, well, there could be some weird things happen. Like it could be, for example, you just mentioned buying a gun from somebody, just an individual. Hey, my neighbor's got an extra gun. Oh, I like that. Let me buy it. And then if you don't store that firearm safely and it's stolen from your car, for example, that serial number is going to come back to whoever bought that gun initially and registered it.
Correct.
And didn't get it re-registered. So is part of your recommended safe storage law that when you do sell a gun, you've got to go through a re-registration process?
I mean, I don't know how you would. There are people that have done that have bought guns from family members, whatever, and wanted to put it in their name, and that's fine. But a lot of times what ends up happening is people inherit guns.
Right. I've got one that I inherited.
Yeah, same. I've got an uncle that was a North Carolina state trooper, that our great uncle that I never met, and I've got his duty weapon.
And those are both probably pre-registration laws. I guess I don't even know when that started.
I don't either. I'm not enough read in on that to comment, but I understand, like, of course the thought there. I would say the pushback on the other side, just for argument's sake, has been, well, back to why the Second Amendment was drafted was because we were just coming out of a tyrannical government, and it was written to prevent a tyrannical government from potentially becoming tyrannical again. So if they know every firearm and where it is and who has it, I guess the argument on the other side is, well, that's probably not great either. But I think whoever's in possession of the gun at the time needs to be held accountable for lack of safe storage. To your your example of the car, if you don't store your firearm securely in your car, what's stored securely? I mean, is your car locked or is it unlocked? Is it in the trunk? Is it not in the trunk? So now, if you leave it on the seat and leave your car unlocked, and some little thug comes along and takes it and goes and shoots somebody with it, that I would say that falls into completely irresponsible. But again, there's so much we'd have to define as far as what do you mean by safe storage. The stuff I think about and hear about a lot, and Canon gun safes is very they have a really pretty cool mission around this same thing, around safe gun storage, not just because they sell safes, but because, like, we've got to stop, making it the wrong person just walk up and get their hand on a gun if you're the owner of that gun.
Right.
Like, it comes back to responsibility. I think a lot of that goes to training too, to be honest with you, on let's not just train people on how to use their gun. Let's talk about all these other things too, safe storage and not letting a 4-year-old play with it. And, like, we need to do more on education. I think.
Of course. And so we definitely agree on some of those points. When it comes to guns stolen out of cars, I want to say two things. I'm in a Facebook group for my my subdivision, my big old subdivision in Franklin, And it just stuns me how many times somebody will come on there and they'll say, everybody beware, my car was broken into last night. They stole my gun, my laptop, and $500 cash. And I'm just thinking, what in the world? Why is anybody using their car for all that? But I think what we would see happen is, I think, and I do believe we need a safe storage law, and I think that is one thing that the legislature, Tennessee legislature, may try to take up this next time, hopefully with people like you helping them along. But they're going to have to be very careful about how they write the law, because it is going to cause some people to not report a theft. Mm-hmm. They'll just not report it. However, there's still a serial number on that firearm. If it's used in a crime, then that serial number can come back to the owner whom it was registered to, which kind of gets back to my earlier point. That's, and it would be pretty rare for a stolen firearm is rarely going to stay in the hands of the thief. They're going to sell it to somebody else. And heck, it may be sold 4 or 5 times before it's actually used in a crime.
Or they'll grind the serial number off if they want to.
Or they'll grind it off. But if the serial number's there, then it's going to come back to the last person to have it registered. And so that creates a little bit of an issue, but I don't think that we'll ever make a law anywhere that doesn't have but this, but that exceptions. And so I don't think those are a reason not to have some sort of safe storage law. I certainly... and actually, frankly, I'm also in favor of a safe storage law that says if it's in your vehicle, which is parked in your home, in your home driveway or whatnot, then you don't get a pass on that for having it in your car. It doesn't need to be in your car, period, because it doesn't matter if it's in the trunk, under the seat, or whatnot. People smash a window and grab stuff. It happens every day. I just don't think you should be riding around with your car like it's a gun safe. That's not what a car is.
We could make the same argument with purses, though.
Absolutely. And I'm not, and I'll be honest with you, this permitless carry stuff, I'm so opposed to that. I really, and I know the Second Amendment, I get it. But as you said, we do have a mental health crisis in this country. And I bet we both know a lot of people, and we think about them. You're the last person that needs to be walking around with a gun.
I know cops that I thought about that in the police academy after I saw him shoot. I thought, we're going to give this guy a gun to walk around with every day.
And I mean, and it's true in Tennessee for the out-of-state listeners. You can walk in Walmart and some guy's got a gun on his hip. And I'm thinking, why,
A lot of those, I completely disagree with not concealed carry, but a lot of those are enhanced carry permit holders in Tennessee that allows you to do that kind of stuff. I think is garbage. I mean, you're gonna be the first person I shoot if I'm a bad guy if you're walking around with a gun on your hip. Of course. I think it's stupid, but if that's there's a lot of things I think are stupid that people do, and if you want to do that, I guess that's you. I don't know, but. The permitless carry thing, I understand kind of the spirit of that and kind of what they were going for. I just would love to be there some sort of requirement for at least some training back to safe storage, things like that.
And Canada, speaking of Canada, Canada does have a pretty strict training course that's required. I believe it's 8 hours in person.
Yeah. Oh, we used to have that in Tennessee, and then they did the online thing, which is, a lot of that course, because I took it when I turned 21.
Well, and from my perspective, what I see Tennessee doing is just hard to even wrap my mind around. Gun deaths increase, and they are making the laws less tight for gun ownership in Tennessee. It's just bizarre.
Well, I think the thought there is we can potentially minimize gun deaths if there's people that can defend themselves. If we're talking true criminal, like encounter gun deaths, mass shooters, all those things, like what stopped the shooter at a Covenant school, right? It was Rex and Michael Colazo with firearms. Yeah. Good guys.
Trained. Hours and hours and hours of training.
Yeah. And again, I think you should have training. I think I tell people all the time, if you're going to carry a gun to protect yourself, or own a gun to protect yourself, your family, your loved ones, whatever, you need to be phenomenal with that thing. Period. I guess So that's the way I look at it and the way I do it. That's, again, back to the purist part of the whole argument for for the permitless carry and all that. That's not it's not a requirement in the Second Amendment that you train with that firearm. Okay, I get it, but I think you should. I mean, I think you're playing with fire if you don't. And if you need to discharge that firearm to protect yourself or your loved ones, and you're not really good with it, then really.
Well, and not only that, you and I both know that we both took training on how to make sure that we are the one always holding the gun that we've got. Because if you don't know what you're doing with it and you're not hadn't had any training in maintaining the firearm, it can easily be taken from you and then used on you. And
Yep.
And that's when my girlfriends ask me about getting a gun, I will often say to them, look, when's the last time you were in a situation where there was a firearm? Well, never. And I said, well, now if you've got one, you've introduced a firearm into a situation over which you have no control and you don't even know how to continue to hold it. And I know in the police academy, we were taught how to stop a criminal from reaching out and grabbing our gun. But the average person doesn't have that training, nor do I think they really need it, because I just don't think that we need to be carrying guns all around us all the time. Although I do support the Second Amendment and I do support our rights to own a firearm. Like I said, I'm a firearm owner,
Sure.
But I'm okay with a lot of bumpers around that. And one of the things, and then we'll kind of wrap up. One of the things that always interests me is, people are really reluctant to have some sort of federal firearm regulation that's meaningful. But I think that there could be something done in that arena. And one reason it would be important is, we don't have walls around our states. And so if we had a pretty good gun law here and they didn't in Alabama, well, it really wouldn't matter, because you can just go back and forth. But if we did have some sort of federal regulation that I think, personally, I think it should be a safe storage type thing where there is a federal law that if a gun is registered to you and it's used in the commission of a crime, then, you've got some culpability there. Obviously, as we've discussed, the gun could have changed hands 15 times.
Sure.
But I think a responsible gun owner would say, if I have a gun and I'm going to sell that to someone, then I need to make sure that it's re-registered to them. And I frankly would never sell a gun to an individual. I never have and I never will. I have sold a couple of firearms and I took them back to gun shops. Yep. I would never sell one to an individual because I can't do a background check on them. I don't know what they're going through,
Right. But not all people do that.
Not all people think like we do. You know.
But, I guess I could make the argument if it's my gun and I sold it to somebody and it was used in a crime or whatever, just back to your, it's an unreported theft. Let's say it's
correct.
That. And you come to me and say, well, the gun registered to you. I was like, well, I sold that 2 years ago. To who? I don't know. Some guy named Chris. What's Chris's last name? I don't know. Like, there's no requirement that I know or have that information.
No, but there should be. I think there should be.
Right. But
I think that should be part of safe storage. I really think it should be renamed. I think it should be, safe ownership law.
Sure.
Safe gun ownership law.
Yeah. And I see where I guess the only reason I brought that up was to kind of circle back on, like, it affects so many other things that I think that's why it's so hard to come together on, because there's so many things that it affects. Other laws, the Second Amendment, federal versus, and there are some federal regulations. I mean, there's the National Firearms Act that regulates, Class 3 weapons and suppressors and all those things, and interstate commerce of those things is all regulated currently. But I think I think the reason we're here and having this conversation is the same reason they did 200 years ago. It's just such a slippery slope. Like, where does it stop, and who makes the ultimate decision? And Tennessee, just as a state and as a General Assembly, leans very purist on it. And I get it.
Well, I do get it, but I don't always understand it because their voters don't lean that way, which I find very strange. It's just like that in school vouchers. two things where the voters think one way and the legislators think another. And I'm a bit of a cynic, and so I always think about following the money, and lobbyists are influential.
Across the whole country.
Yes, they are.
Fair.
And
yes.
Lobbying is a business. They're making an investment for a return. So
Definitely.
the Tennessee Farmers Association's made an investment for a return. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
You don't have to agree with that.
Well, no, I mean, I know those guys. I'm friends with them. I just think.
Tell them I said hi.
Sure. I think we're all in agreement in that the goal is the same. We want to have fewer people die by suicide from a firearm or homicide from a firearm.
Or more, we don't want to see any more little children die.
100%.
Yes. And I agree with that. I would never say that someone on the other side of this issue from me doesn't also feel that way.
Yeah. And it's just, again, back to how do we get there?
Right.
If a kid drowns in a bathtub because mom wasn't watching, do we now outlaw bathtubs? I mean, it's like.
No, but we charge mom.
Agreed. And I think we should be, and I think I agree with you here. I think there's certainly culpability if it's knowingly, recklessly, or intentionally doing something that's going to potentially cause somebody harm.
Right. In my other life, I'm an insurance agent. I've been in insurance a very long time.
Okay.
And one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that with most companies, if you have a swimming pool in your backyard, you have to have a gate around it. You have to have a fence around it and a locked gate so that the neighbor's child can't wander in and drown in your pool.
Right.
But the neighbor's child can walk in your house and find a gun laying on the sofa.
Yeah.
Seems to me.
Is that in, and I don't know, I know in Tennessee it's that way. Is that in every state that the law that there's got to be a like a fence around the pool?
I don't know.
I know it is in Tennessee just because I've got friends with pools. But
so we care more about, keeping our pools safe than we do keeping a loaded gun safe. And that just sounds strange to me. And I hope that and I know that you have testified before as an expert witness at the legislature, and I'm assuming that you'll be right up there again when it starts. And I'm hoping that that you will be listened to. People on my side of the aisle rarely get listened to, but I hope you'll be listened to. And I also hope that when they do come up with something, and I do think they have felt enough pressure now that they realize that Tennesseans want something positive done, I hope that they write it so that it's not immediately taken to court and overturned, because about half the laws they write are in court.
Definitely.
And I just really hope that they do remember that we do all have some basic things in common, as you said. We don't want to see any more little children die in school. We don't want children afraid to go to school. Good
Amen.
Lord. I mean, I'm a good bit older than you are, I'm sure, but, I was only afraid of nuclear war. I was afraid of the bomb when I went to school. But eventually then everybody realized that's probably not going to happen. And we had tornado drills in my school. That was it. And we could get into a whole longer discussion about why ramp up in violence in the United States. And, of course, as a student of criminology, I go back to theories about why we're under such pressure, and the strain theory, and why crime is what it is. Whether it's decreasing or increasing depends on who you listen to, but we know it's still there, and there's still a lot of it.
Yes, ma'am.
And why certain segments of our population have to live in areas and do live in areas where there is more crime, and what causes all of that. But we'll just have to talk about that another time, because you're an interesting guest.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you being here, and I appreciate what you're doing and the service that you're offering. I know you're not doing it for free. I know it's your business, but I also know that you could probably, do something else with less stress and maybe even make more money. But what you're doing is so important, because we are never going to be able to fix it with just one solution. So teaching people how to stay safe, be safe, and in schools, teaching, teachers what to do with the students, how to protect them. That is so important, and it saves lives, and it saved lives at Covenant, and it will save lives at the next school, at the next indoor place. It's pretty hard to save lives somewhere like in Las Vegas when it's an outdoor concert. That's pretty tough.
Well, the one quick side note to that is the big takeaway from there, and when we teach this in our full training, an hour of our training, or a little over an hour of our 4.5 hour training is all medical, pre-hospital, and trauma care.
Right. Stop the bleeding.
Big takeaway from Vegas is that's how we had an 86% survival rate out there. Was the cops had bleeding control training and equipment. Several members in that audience were currently or formerly in the military. So they'd been through combat lifesaver or tactical combat casualty care. And then a bunch of members of that audience were outdoorsmen and hunters who had put themselves through a course called wilderness first aid. So the audience and law enforcement knew how to treat the two most preventable causes of battlefield death: extremity hemorrhage, right, bleeding from an arm or leg, which we can fix with a tourniquet. And number two is called tension pneumothorax, and I won't get into what that is here. But the point is, like, that's a huge takeaway from that event, right, of like, okay, we can back to mitigating damage. We're never going to stop all these. Like we're never going to stop all these.
Right.
But if we can mitigate damage, let's talk about that.
Yes.
And that's why we focus on medical so much. And I don't know when to wrap up, but just I've got 9 million proud moments of those teachers from coming to, but one of the most proud was, I did a walk through that crime scene, which is the hardest thing I've done in my life. But every classroom I went in, the teachers had gotten their trauma kits out, because after we taught them on training, we donate one kit to them, but that school, and like most, bought one for every room, because if you're locked down, I don't know how long it's going to be. And they had gotten those kits out and they were ready to treat people.
Wow.
Past everything else they'd been through.
Right. They still had the wherewithal to do that. But that's what training remarkable. Does. That's what training does. And it can't just be a one-time training. Amen. I mean, some places I'm sure you go in year after year, right? First you have new employees, but secondly, it's that reinforcement.
Yes, ma'am.
That works.
Yes.
Wow. Agreed. That's fantastic to hear, and I do agree with you that is another thing that's super important. And maybe Tennessee can even come up with a law that says that the state's going to pay for every classroom in this state, private or public, to have one of those kits in every room. Yeah. Now, see, that's something most everybody would agree with and would think it. The people who want guns to be taken away from us completely would not agree with that, but at least it would be something, in a positive direction. Well, I really appreciate you and what you're doing, and it's good to get to know you. And I know that my listeners have probably, I want to say, enjoyed this. It hasn't been exactly enjoyable, but it's certainly been a knowledge that we all need and things that we need to think about. And I appreciate y'all tuning into Blue Lift, and my producer always looks at me and says, now it's time for me to remember to plug myself, and I forget to do that, but I want you to listen to the podcast, like it, share it, rate it, review it. I hope I said all the right things.
Comment.
There you go. There you go. And tune in next time, because we're just continuing to have fantastic guests. So thank you so much, Brink. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.